Today, I want to take you back to 19th century France, to a courtroom drama that had the entire country leaning in. It's got everything: an unhappy marriage, a sudden mysterious death, a public desperate for a villain, and a brand new kind of evidence that was supposed to speak for the dead. At the center of it all is Marie Lafarge, a young woman accused of murdering her husband with arsenic in what became one of France's first major trials shaped by forensic toxicology. To understand why this case exploded, you have to start with the marriage. Marie wasn't born Marie Lafarge. She was Marie Fortuny Capel, raised in Paris in a comfortable bourgeois world, educated, polished, and used to a certain standard of life. In 1839, she married Charles Lafarge, a man she connected with through a matrimonial agency, essentially an early matchmaking service. On paper, it promised stability and respectability. In reality, it was a shock. When Marie arrived at Charles's estate in rural Limousin, the picture she'd been sold apparently fell apart. Instead of the comfortable home she expected, she found a property in decline and finances that were, to put it gently, a mess. Far from Parisian society, she felt isolated and embarrassed. She wrote to her family about how disappointed she was, and over time those letters took on a sharper edge: resentment, frustration, the sense that she'd been deceived and trapped. At one point, she even tried to have the marriage annulled, arguing that Charles had misrepresented what he could offer her. But the law and the social expectations of the era rarely made room for a woman to simply undo a marriage because she was unhappy. By the end of 1839, whatever hope they had of building a life together seemed to be turning into open bitterness. Then Charles got sick. In December of 1839, he suddenly developed severe stomach problems after eating food that had been prepared at home. He had intense pain, vomiting, weakness, the kind of symptoms that are terrifying precisely because they can look like so many illnesses. Today, you might immediately wonder about poisoning, especially arsenic, but at the time suspicion didn't necessarily jump there for everyone. Still, the illness was dramatic, and it didn't just pass cleanly. Charles seemed to recover for a short time, and then, in early January, he fell ill again after consuming food Marie had sent to him while he was away on business: a cake and eggnog. When he returned home, his condition worsened, and on January 14th, 1840, he died. And once he was gone, the story around his death began to harden into an accusation. Almost immediately, people around the household began to point toward Marie. Family members and servants told authorities that she had bought arsenic from a local pharmacist. The explanation, they said, was that it was for killing rats, which was a common enough reason on an estate. They also claimed she'd had access and opportunity. Time alone in the kitchen, moments when she could have put something into food or drink without anyone noticing. And then there was something more tangible. Investigators found arsenic on the property, in Marie's possession. That discovery didn't prove she used it to kill Charles, but poured fuel on an already blazing suspicion. Marie denied murdering him. Yes, she acknowledged the arsenic, but she offered a different explanation: cosmetic use. It sounds strange to modern ears, but in that period arsenic was sometimes used in beauty routines, even though it was dangerous. Marie insisted that Charles's death had natural causes and accused his family of turning on her, of trying to destroy her reputation and position now that he was gone. But the case didn't stay local for long. The press got involved, and once newspapers found a story with a young wife, a dead husband, and whispers of poison, it became a national fixation. People weren't just following a trial, they were choosing sides. By the time Marie's trial began in September of 1840, France was essentially watching a cultural battle play out. On one side were those who viewed Marie as a calculating poisoner, the classic image of the arsenic wife, cold and strategic. On the other side were people who saw her as educated and refined, dropped into a grim marriage, cornered by social expectations, and then made into a convenient villain. The prosecution's case leaned heavily on what we'd call circumstantial evidence. She bought arsenic. Charles got sick after consuming food connected to her. Witnesses described suspicious timing and access, and arsenic was found. None of that, on its own, was a clear moment of proof. But stacked together, it created a narrative. and narratives can be incredibly powerful in a courtroom. Still, the real fight in this trial wasn't just about motives and timelines. It was about science. Specifically, whether science was advanced enough to tell the difference between suspicion and certainty. Here's where things get fascinating. Detecting arsenic in a body in the 1840s was possible, but far from straightforward. Local chemists examined Charles's organs and reported finding arsenic, but their procedures weren't consistent, and the reliability of the results was questioned. In a case where a woman's life was on the line, "We think we detected it," wasn't good enough for the defense. So the defense brought in a major figure, Mathieu Orfila, widely considered the leading toxicologist of the era. Orfila used a newer method known as the Marsh test, which was cutting edge at the time. He examined the remains and concluded that arsenic was present. That should have been the end of the story, right? The best toxicologist in France says arsenic is there, so Marie must be guilty. But the defense didn't let it settle that easily, and their arguments still echo in how we talk about forensic evidence today. They raised the possibility of contamination. Were the samples handled properly? Were the chemicals and tools used in testing clean, or could they have introduced arsenic themselves? Could the environment have played a role? They even pointed to the grave and the surrounding soil, arguing that arsenic could occur naturally and might seep into remains over time. Their point wasn't that toxicology was useless. Their point was that early toxicology could be fragile, and fragile evidence shouldn't decide a murder conviction. So the courtroom became a stage for something bigger than Marie and Charles. It became a test of how much faith society should place in emerging forensic chemistry versus traditional standards of proof. When science is new, when methods aren't fully standardized, how do you weigh an expert's confidence against the possibility of error? Marie also chose to testify in her own defense, which was a major moment. By many accounts, she spoke with clarity and emotion, describing her marriage as a kind of trap she couldn't escape. Supporters heard sincerity and pain. Critics heard performance and manipulation. And that's another uncomfortable reality. Juries don't only evaluate facts. They evaluate people, and people bring biases about gender, class, and what grief or innocence is supposed to look like. On September 19th, 1840, the jury delivered its verdict, guilty. Marie Lafarge was convicted of murder and sentenced to life at hard labor, though that sentence was later reduced to imprisonment. The decision didn't settle the national argument. If anything, it deepened it. Was France witnessing justice, or was it watching a woman get crushed by uncertain science and social suspicion? Marie spent years in prison maintaining that she was innocent. She wrote, she argued her case in the court of public opinion, and her supporters continued to push for reconsideration. Over time, her health deteriorated and she developed tuberculosis. Eventually, after petitions and public pressure, she received a partial pardon and was released in 1852. Not long after, she died, only 36 years old. Whether Marie was truly guilty is still debated. Some historians look at the pattern of illness and the presence of arsenic and conclude that she likely did it. Others see a case built on contamination risks, imperfect methods, and a heavy reliance on circumstance, and they argue that the proof never rose to the level that should end someone's life and freedom. And the hardest part is this: the full truth may have died with her. But even if we can't close the book on Marie Lafarge as a person, we can see exactly why the Lafarge case changed the justice system. It was one of the first major trials to hinge on toxicological evidence, and it forced the public and the courts to confront the limits of laboratory science. It also exposed how much legal outcomes can be shaped by class expectations, by gendered assumptions, and by the seductive simplicity of a story that feels true even when the evidence is complicated. When we talk about forensics today, we often treat it like an impartial referee. The Lafarge case is a reminder that forensic science has a history, and that history includes growing pains, uncertainty, and very human stakes. It's a haunting blend of scandal, chemistry, and social pressure, and it still asks a question that matters now as much as it did then. When science enters the courtroom, how sure is sure enough? Thanks for listening. If you enjoy these deep dives into historical mysteries and courtroom turning points, follow or subscribe, and consider leaving a rating so more people can find the show. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.